22, I said one cruel sentence on my Amish wedding night. She remembered it for 50 years. The chamomile was still warm in the cup when I said it. That's the part I go back to. Not the words, I'll get to the words, but the cup. Rebecca's mother had set it on the nightstand in the upstairs room of their farmhouse, the room with the drafty window that faced east toward the Stoltzfus pasture. November. The bed quilt was one her grandmother had stitched. Wedding ring pattern, green and white, the green almost black in the lamplight. Rebecca's hands were shaking. I remember that. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, and her fingers kept turning the edge of the quilt over and over, folding and unfolding the binding. And I remember thinking that she was cold. I thought it was the cold. I didn't know yet that chamomile was the remedy her mother had been giving her since she was 9 years old. Every time the fear came, every time her chest got tight and her breath came out in those little pieces, her ma'am would steep the dried flowers, the ones from the garden along the south fence, the ones that smelled like apples and dust, and she'd set the cup down without a word. That was the medicine, the tea and the silence together. But I didn't know any of that yet. I was 21. I thought a wife who trembled on her wedding night was trembling because of me. And so I opened my mouth, and what came out, give me a second. I've carried it for 50 years, and it still sits in my throat like a stone. I was 21, and I didn't know what chamomile was for. Quick pause. My name is Joseph, and this is Rebecca's husband. If these stories stay with you, if they remind you of something the old ones knew, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, was there a remedy in your family that someone gave you before you were old enough to understand what it was really healing? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these old ways are worth remembering. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. The thing you have to understand about where I grew up, and I don't mean just the county or the district, I mean the particular bend of road where our farm sat between two creeks in Lancaster County, is that healing wasn't something you went and got. It was something that lived in the house already, like the cast iron skillet that never left the stove, like the Bible on the shelf by the door. My grandmother, Ma'am's mother, we called her Gross Mammy, she kept a garden that ran the whole length of the south side of the house, and in that garden there were things growing that I didn't have names for until I was 15, maybe 16. Chamomile, valerian, comfrey with leaves big as my hand, echinacea that came back every July like it had made a promise. She never called herself a healer. Nobody did. But when someone in the family couldn't sleep, or had a cough that wouldn't break, or felt that tightness in the chest that we didn't have a word for back then, Gross Mammy would go out to the garden, and she'd come back with something. That's how it worked. No announcements, no explanations. The remedy just appeared, and you drank it, and you didn't ask what it was for, because asking would have meant admitting something was wrong. And in our community, in our Ordnung, you carried what you carried quietly. The Braucher 2 farms over, old Ezra Byler, he could stop blood with words. I saw it once. But even that, even the powwow, was done in whispers. Healing was real, but it moved through the house like a draft under the door. You felt it. You didn't point at it. And that was the rule Rebecca grew up under too, though I didn't know the shape of it in her house until years later. Her ma'am, Sarah, was a quiet woman. Thin wrists, she always smelled like dried lavender and lye soap, and she had a way of entering a room that made no sound at all. I used to think she was just shy. I was wrong about that, the way I was wrong about most things back then. Sarah had been giving Rebecca chamomile since she was a girl, not every night, but on the nights when Rebecca's breathing would go shallow, and her hands would clench and she'd get a look in her eyes like a horse that's heard thunder but can't see the sky. I almost asked about it once. Before the wedding, I was at their table for Sunday supper, and I saw Sarah set a cup down beside Rebecca without a word, and Rebecca wrapped both hands around it like it was the only warm thing in the room. I opened my mouth. But the thing is, in our community, a man doesn't ask about what a mother gives her daughter. You look away. You eat your bread. I ate my bread. I should tell you about Rebecca. I should tell you what she was before I tell you what I did. We'd been courting for a year and a half, which was long by our standards. Most couples in our district, this was 1974, late autumn, They'd court for maybe 8, 10 months. But Rebecca and I were slow about it, and I think that was mostly her. Not because she didn't care for me. She did. I could see it in the way she'd hand me a glass of water after the singing on Sunday nights. She'd press it into my hand with both of hers, and her fingers were always cool, even in August, but she was careful. She moved through the world like someone walking on a frozen pond, testing every step. I thought it was grace. I thought it was modesty. "Dat, my father Amos," he said to me once, sitting in the barn with the second beam he'd had to brace after the ice storm of '71. He said, "That girl carries something, Joseph. You be gentle with whatever it is." I nodded. I said I would. I meant it. I meant it the way a 21-year-old means anything, which is to say, I meant it completely and understood nothing. The wedding was November 19th, a Tuesday, which was tradition in our district. 300 people in her parents' house, and the temporary benches set up in the main room and the barn. Rebecca wore the blue dress her mother had sewn, dark blue, almost navy, with the white cape and apron. Her hands were steady during the ceremony. I remember that because later they weren't. The bishop, Levi Zook, he spoke for nearly 3 hours. I couldn't tell you a single word he said. I was watching Rebecca's profile, the way she held her chin, the small muscle in her jaw that tightened and released and tightened again. After the meal, after the singing, after the last of the guests had gone home in their buggies and the lanterns in the barn had been put out one by one, we went upstairs, to the room her mother had prepared, the room where we would sleep that first night, in her parents' house, which was the way it was done. And Sarah, Rebecca's ma'am, she had left the cup on the nightstand. The chamomile, I didn't know that's what it was. I just saw a cup of tea that was going cold. Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed and she was shaking. Not dramatic, not like in a movie, not that I'd seen movies then, just a fine tremor, like a branch in a wind you can barely feel. Her fingers working the edge of that quilt, over and under, over and under. The kerosene lamp on the dresser was hissing the way they do when the wick needs trimming, and the light made everything in the room the color of honey. The walls, the floorboards, the side of her face. I could hear her parents moving around downstairs, the soft sound of dishes, a door closing. Then nothing. I stood by the window for a moment. The glass was cold when I put my fingertips against it. I could see the outline of the barn, and beyond it the dark line of trees against a sky with no moon. I didn't know what to do. Nobody had told me what to do. Dad had said, "Be gentle." The bishop had talked about duties and bonds and the will of God. Nobody had said what to do when your wife is sitting on the bed shaking, and you're standing by the window, and the distance between you is 6 feet, but it might as well be the width of the whole county. I turned around, I looked at her, and I said, "I need to tell this exactly right, because the words matter, the exact words." I said, "Rebecca, there's nothing to be afraid of. You're not a child." That was it, 7 words. 8, I don't know. I've counted them 1,000 times, and I always lose track because my mind won't hold them steady. There's nothing to be afraid of. You're not a child. I said it quiet. I didn't say it mean. I want you to understand that. I wasn't a cruel man. I was an ignorant one, which might be worse, because cruelty knows what it's doing. I thought I was being, I don't know what I thought I was being. Strong, reassuring, the kind of husband who steadies things. But what I was actually doing was taking the thing she'd carried her whole life, that fear, that trembling, that tightness in her chest that her mother had been treating with chamomile since she was 9, and I was telling her it was childish. I was telling her to stop, and she heard me. She looked up and something in her face closed like a door. Not a slam, quieter than that, like a latch clicking into place. She reached over and picked up the cup of chamomile and set it on the floor under the nightstand where I couldn't see it, and she didn't shake any more that night. She went still. So still, I thought I'd fixed it. That's the part that sits in me heaviest, 50 years on. I thought the stillness meant I'd done something right. I thought she'd heard me and found her courage, and that was that. But what had actually happened, and I wouldn't understand this for decades, was that she'd learned to hide. Not from me, exactly. From the shame of what I'd named without meaning to. I'd called her fear childish, and so she put it away. she put the remedy away with it. Her ma'am kept growing chamomile along the south fence, kept drying the flowers in the attic where they hung in little bundles from the rafters, like tiny upside-down bouquets, but Rebecca stopped drinking it, not all at once. But over the first year of our marriage, the cup that Sarah would still sometimes set out, Rebecca would leave it, untouched, cold. I'd see it in the morning on the kitchen table, full, with a skin on the surface, and I'd pour it out without thinking. I didn't know I was pouring out medicine. I didn't know there was a sickness. Neither of us had the word for what Rebecca carried. We didn't say anxiety in our community. We didn't say panic. We said someone was nervous or high-strung or, and this was the one that got used most, just her way. It was just her way. And her mother's remedy, the chamomile, the quiet cup set down without explanation, that had been the treatment for a thing none of us could name. And I had, with one sentence on a November night, made her ashamed of both the sickness and the cure. I didn't mean to. I need you to hear that, even if it doesn't make it better. I didn't know what chamomile was for. I didn't know what Rebecca's shaking was. My dad, God rest him, he'd said be gentle and he'd meant it, but he didn't have the words to tell me why. He didn't have the words because his father didn't have them either. The silence wasn't one man's failure. It was the water we all swam in. In our house, you didn't talk about the invisible things. You treated them with a T, with a poultice, with a Braucher's whispered verse, but you never said their name out loud. And I wonder now, I wonder often, what would have changed if Sarah had pulled me aside before the wedding and said, "Joseph, your wife has a condition. The chamomile is not just tea. Don't take it from her." But that's not something a mother-in-law says to a son-in-law in our world. That would have meant admitting her daughter was, what? Broken? We didn't think of it that way. We just knew the tea helped, and we didn't ask why. And so I walked into that marriage with love and ignorance in equal measure, and the ignorance did what ignorance always does. That's what the old ones knew. The remedy only works if you let it. The years after that night, I want to tell you they were bad, but that wouldn't be honest. They were mostly good. That's the thing people outside the community don't understand. A marriage can carry a wound and still be a marriage. Rebecca and I built a life. We had the farm, 80 acres, dairy mostly, some tobacco in the lower field. We had 4 children in 7 years. Elam, then Mary, then little Amos, named for my dad. Then Sarah, named for her ma'am. Rebecca was a good mother, better than good. She had a way with the babies that I envied, if I'm honest. She'd hold them against her shoulder and walk the kitchen in the dark, back and forth, and she'd hum, not a hymn exactly, just a sound, low and steady, like the sound the creek makes in August when the water's almost gone. But the shaking never stopped. She just got better at hiding it. I'd catch it sometimes. A Sunday morning before church, her hands trembling while she pinned her cape. Or a Thursday evening when a storm came up fast and the windows rattled, and I'd see her grip the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles went white. She never reached for the chamomile. I think she wanted to. I think sometimes she almost did. But that door I'd shut on our wedding night, it stayed shut. And I told myself it was fine because she never brought it up and I never brought it up, and that was how we did things. That was how everybody did things. I thought silence was the same as peace. It took me a long, long time to learn the difference. I wasn't the only one carrying something I didn't understand. That's what I found out slowly. The way you find out anything in a community that doesn't talk. By accident, in pieces, at the edges of other conversations. My brother Eli, 2 years younger than me, built like a fence post, hands like shovels. He told me something once while we were cutting wood for the winter. November, maybe 1979. The saw was loud, so he had to lean in close. He said, "Anna cries at night sometimes, and I don't know what to do about it." Anna was his wife. He said it fast, like he was trying to get it out before he lost the nerve. And then he went right back to the saw. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and fed the next log through. We never talked about it again, and my neighbor, Mose Lapp, good man, farmed the land east of ours, had a beard down to his chest by the time he was 30. He said something at a barn raising that stayed with me. We were up on the frame, nailing cross braces, and he said, real quiet so nobody else could hear, My Mary takes a tea her mother makes. I don't know what's in it, but she's better when she drinks it." He looked at me like he was asking permission to say more, but someone called his name from below, and he climbed down the ladder, and that was it. That was the whole conversation. 7 seconds, maybe 10. But I heard it. I heard what he was really saying. There was another man. I won't use his real name. I'll call him Daniel. He was in our church district. Quiet man, even by our standards. His wife had what we'd now call, well, I don't want to put a name on someone else's suffering, but she struggled. Everyone could see it. She'd sit through the 3-hour service on Sundays, and her face would be wet, and she'd never make a sound, and nobody said a word. Daniel told me once, years later, at a funeral. It was the funeral for old Ezra Byler, the Browker, the winter of '83. Daniel said, "I went to Ezra once, about my wife. I asked him to do the Browka over her. The words. I waited. He was looking at his hands. Ezra said some things the herbs can't touch. Some things only time and kindness get to. And he told me, he said, 'Daniel, the biggest healing a man can do is to stop making his wife ashamed of what hurts her.'" Daniel looked at me when he said that. Right at me. And I don't know if he knew about Rebecca, about what I'd said that night, about the chamomile she'd stopped drinking, but something in his eyes, I felt it go through me like cold water. I didn't say anything back. I just stood there in the cemetery with the frozen ground under my boots and the smell of wood smoke coming from somewhere, and I thought, that's what I did. I made her ashamed of what hurt her. 4 winters later, I was still thinking about it. The moment it broke open, the moment I finally understood what I'd done and what the chamomile had really been, it didn't come in a dramatic way. It came in the kitchen, a Tuesday, March of 1997. Rebecca and I had been married 23 years. The children were mostly grown, or nearly there. Elam was married himself by then. I was sitting at the table after the morning milking, and Rebecca was at the stove, and she turned around and she had a cup in her hands. Chamomile. I could smell it, that apple and dust smell, the smell of her mother's garden, the smell of that first night, and she set it down on the table. Not for me, for herself. She sat across from me and she wrapped both hands around it the same way she had when she was 20 years old at her parents' table, and I watched her lift it and drink. Her hands were shaking, just barely. That fine tremor I knew so well. And she looked at me over the rim and she said, "And this is what I've carried every day since. This is the sentence that answered my sentence from 50 years ago." She said, "You told me I wasn't a child, but your ma'am's mother knew I was sick. My ma'am knew I was sick. The chamomile knew. And I stopped taking it because of what you said. I stopped for 23 years, Joseph." She wasn't angry. No, wait. She was angry. But it was the kind of anger that's been sitting so long it's turned into something else. Something quieter. Something that just wants to be heard. I put my hands on the table, flat, palms down, and I looked at them. My father's hands, rough and cracked and useless in that moment. And I said, "I'm sorry," and she said, "I know." And then she drank her tea, and I sat there. That's what the old ones knew. You can't unheal a wound by pretending the medicine was weakness. I grieved for the boy I'd been, for the 21-year-old standing by that window on his wedding night, wanting so badly to be a man that he crushed the only soft thing in the room. I grieved for Rebecca, for all the nights she lay beside me with her chest tight and her hands clenched and no cup on the nightstand. 23 years of that. I tried to explain it once to an Englishman I did business with, a lumber buyer from Philadelphia. I told him my wife had a remedy she stopped using because of something I said. He shrugged. He said, "So, tell her to start again." And I realized he couldn't understand. He couldn't understand that in our world, a word spoken carries the weight of a beam. You can't just take it back. It's built into the structure now. You have to live under it or tear the whole thing down. And we don't tear things down. We add braces. We shore up what's leaning. That's the Amish way. The loneliness of that, of being a man caught between a world that tells you to fix it with a sentence and a world that knows a sentence is what broke it in the first place. I don't know how to describe that. I don't have the words for it. I just know I stood between those two worlds for a long time, and neither one could hold all of what I felt. But here's what I want to tell you, because this isn't just a story about what I broke. It's a story about what was given to me that I almost lost, and then by grace, by Rebecca's courage, not mine, got back. The Amish life gave me three things I will carry to my grave. The first is the knowledge that the earth heals, not as a saying, as a fact. I watched my grandmother pull chamomile from the dirt and dry it in the attic and turn it into something that held my wife's fear in its hands when I couldn't. The second is the sound of quiet. Not silence, we had too much silence, and silence can be its own kind of sickness, but quiet. The quiet of a kitchen at 5 in the morning. The quiet of a horse breathing in a dark barn. The quiet that tells you the world is still here and it's holding. And the third is Rebecca herself, who drank her tea that Tuesday morning in 1997, and by doing so taught me that a remedy refused is not a remedy lost. It's a remedy waiting. That's what the old ones knew. Wisdom dressed in plain clothes. The chamomile is still growing along the south fence of her mother's. No, her mother's gone now. But Rebecca transplanted it. It grows along our fence now, and every evening she drinks a cup, and I never say a word. Not because I'm silent the way I used to be, but because I've learned that sometimes the most healing thing a man can do is sit across the table and let the medicine work. If you grew up somewhere the remedies were given without explanation, where a cup of tea appeared, and you didn't know it was holding you together, I see you. If you ever said something to someone you love that made them put down the very thing that was helping them, and you didn't know it for years, I see you. If you're the one who stopped taking the medicine, whatever it was, the tea, the walk, the prayer, the thing your mother gave you that you were too ashamed to keep, I see you. If you're still inside the community and you're watching this, and you know a woman, your wife, your sister, your daughter, who carries something no one has named yet, I see you. If you left and you missed the smell of dried chamomile in an attic in November, I see you. If you lost someone that a simple remedy might have reached if only someone had known to keep giving it, I see you. Wherever you are in this, I see you, and you are not alone. Tell me in the comments, what remedy did your family carry that you didn't understand until later? What was the tea, the salve, the thing your grandmother made that you thought was just habit but turned out to be medicine? I want to hear it. There is so much more I haven't said yet. There are remedies I haven't been ready to share, but I'm getting closer. If you want to hear the rest, subscribe to Rebecca's husband. Stay here. These stories aren't going anywhere, and neither am I. And if a super chat or a membership feels right to you, that's you saying the old ways still matter. That's enough. The remedy only works if you let it reach you.